Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into one of the most intimate and mysterious questions we can ask. What is the true nature of consciousness? Is it something your brain carefully constructs moment by moment, like a hidden architect shaping a private world? Or is it something deeper, something fundamental, woven into the fabric of reality itself? But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum. Let your shoulders drop just a little. And as we begin this gentle exploration of consciousness, remember that you don't have to understand everything. You don't have to solve anything tonight. If your mind wanders, let it wander. We will move slowly, like a boat drifting across still water. If you pause for a moment, you may notice something very simple. You are here, not as a concept, not as a body described by biology, but as an experience. Perhaps you feel the weight of your body resting. Perhaps you hear a faint sound in the room. Perhaps there is a memory lingering from today, or a small flicker of emotion passing through. All of that, the sounds, the warmth, the subtle movements of thought, is what we call consciousness. It is not abstract. It is not distant. It is the simple fact that something is happening, and it is happening to you. Centuries ago, a philosopher named René Descartes tried to doubt everything. He wondered whether the world might be an illusion, whether his senses could be misleading him, whether even mathematics might be deceptive. But in the middle of that radical doubt, he noticed something that could not be shaken. The very act of doubting was itself an experience. And so he concluded gently and simply, "I think, therefore I am." We might soften that tonight. Instead of "I think," we could say, "There is experience." Even if thoughts disappear, even if words fall silent, there is still something present, an awareness of silence perhaps, or the faint sense of being. Consciousness is not just thinking. It is the ache of a sore muscle, the sweetness of tea, the colour blue, the feeling of love, the flicker of fear. It is what philosophers sometimes call what it is like to be you. And here is where the mystery begins. Modern science can describe the brain in extraordinary detail. It can trace signals travelling along nerves. It can measure electrical activity across networks of cells. It can even describe how tiny charged particles move across microscopic boundaries, creating waves of activity that ripple through your brain. But somewhere between those movements, between the chemistry and the electricity, something extraordinary happens. The movement becomes a feeling. The electrical pattern becomes the taste of chocolate. The neural activity becomes the redness of a sunset. The firing of cells becomes the sense of being someone. And no matter how detailed the scientific explanation becomes, there remains a quiet question. Why does any of it feel like anything at all? This is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is stubborn. We can explain how the brain processes information. We can explain how it integrates signals. We can explain how it reacts to danger or stores memories. But explaining function is not the same as explaining experience. Imagine describing a symphony entirely in terms of vibrating air molecules. You could be perfectly accurate. You could describe the frequency of every note, the amplitude of every wave. But nowhere in that description would you find the sorrow of the melody or the swell of emotion as the orchestra rises. In the same way, we can describe the brain's activity with stunning precision. Yet the feeling of being alive, the simple glow of awareness, seems to slip through the net of description. Some thinkers argue that this gap is only temporary. They believe that as neuroscience advances, the mystery will dissolve. Others suggest that something deeper is at stake, that consciousness may not fit neatly into the framework we use to explain physical objects. For now, we do not need to choose sides. Instead, we can rest with the fact that consciousness is the one thing we cannot step outside of. Every theory, every equation, every experiment, every doubt, all of it appears within experience. Even the attempt to explain consciousness happens inside consciousness. It is as if we're trying to examine the light of a lamp using only the illumination that lamp provides. We can study the objects in the room. We can study the walls, the table, the dust in the air. But the light itself is what makes all studying possible. And so tonight, rather than rushing toward answers, we begin with something quieter. Before the brain, before philosophy, before debate, there is simply this: the soft hum of existence, the quiet fact that something is happening, the gentle certainty that in some way you are aware. And as we continue to explore, slowly, carefully, we will begin to ask whether this awareness is something the brain constructs, like a careful storyteller weaving a narrative, or whether the brain itself might be moving inside a deeper field of awareness. But for now, we stay with the simplest truth. You are here, not as an object in the world, but as the place where the world appears. Time equals 2 seconds / greater than. If you were to open your eyes right now, it might feel as though the world simply flows into you. Light enters your eyes, sound enters your ears, sensations travel inward. It feels direct, immediate, almost transparent, as if you are a window looking out onto reality. But neuroscience suggests something quieter, and perhaps stranger. The brain does not wait for the world to arrive, it predicts it. Long before the light reaches your awareness, your brain is already guessing what it expects to see. Before a sound fully forms, your brain has already prepared its best estimate of what that sound will be. In a very real sense, your perception is not a photograph of reality. It is a carefully edited draft. Imagine walking into your kitchen at night. You reach for the light switch in the usual place. You do not slowly analyze every inch of the wall. You simply know where it is. Your brain predicted it would be there, and most of the time that prediction is correct. This predictive ability is not a small feature of the brain. It appears to be its central strategy. Rather than building experience from the ground up, pixel by pixel, the brain works from the top down. It generates a model of the world and then checks incoming information against that model. If the prediction matches the incoming signals, very little needs to change. If something unexpected happens, the model updates. In more technical language, scientists sometimes describe this as the brain minimizing prediction error. But we can soften that idea. Think of it this way: the brain dislikes surprise. It constantly adjusts its expectations to reduce the difference between what it predicts and what actually happens. You can see this in everyday life. When you mishear someone's words in a noisy room, your brain fills in the blanks. When you read a sentence with a small typo, you often do not notice. Your brain quietly corrects it before you become aware. Even optical illusions reveal this process. Your brain makes a best guess about depth, light, or movement, and sometimes that guess is wrong. This suggests something profound. What you experience as the world is not raw data. It is a best guess, a living simulation that runs so smoothly you mistake it for reality itself. This does not mean the world is imaginary. It means your access to it is always filtered through interpretation. Consider colour. The world outside your body does not contain redness or blueness in the way you experience them. There are wavelengths of light, patterns of energy. Your brain translates those patterns into the vivid palette you know. The redness of a sunset is not floating in space. It is constructed inside experience, or take sound. Air molecules vibrate in waves. The brain interprets those vibrations as music or speech, or the distant hum of traffic. The vibration itself is not music. Music happens in consciousness. Even the feeling of solidity, the sense that objects are firm and stable, emerges from invisible interactions between tiny particles in your nervous system. At the smallest scales, matter is mostly empty space, structured by fields and forces. Yet your experience is of solid wood, smooth glass, cool metal. The brain builds a coherent world from fragments, and it does so not to reveal ultimate truth, but to keep you alive. Evolution does not reward perfect perception, it rewards useful perception. If a simplified model helps you avoid danger, find food, or form social bonds, it is good enough. Accuracy beyond survival value is unnecessary. In fact, too much raw detail might overwhelm you. Imagine if you could see every atom vibrating, hear every microscopic movement, feel every fluctuation in temperature. The richness would be unbearable. The brain filters, simplifies, predicts. This is why some scientists describe perception as a controlled hallucination. That phrase may sound dramatic, but it simply means that your experience is a guided interpretation, anchored to sensory input but shaped by expectation. When you look at a familiar face, your brain does not analyze each feature from scratch. It recognizes patterns instantly. When you walk through your home in the dark, you do not measure distances mathematically. You move through a trusted internal map. In this sense, your reality is not passively received, it is actively constructed. And this has consequences for our question about consciousness. If the world you experience is a model built by the brain, then the sense of self within that world may also be part of the construction. The feeling that I am here, inside this body, looking out, might not be a simple fact. It may be another prediction, another useful model. Think about how seamlessly you feel located behind your eyes. It feels obvious. But this location is inferred. Signals from your eyes, ears, skin, and muscles are integrated into a single perspective. The brain anchors that perspective somewhere, usually just behind the face. But experiments have shown that this sense of location can shift. With certain illusions or gentle stimulation of specific brain regions, people can feel as though they're floating above their bodies or standing a few feet to the side. If your location can move, then perhaps it was never as fixed as it felt. The brain, it seems, is not only constructing the world, it is constructing the point from which the world is viewed. And yet, even if perception is constructed, something remains constant. There is still experience. Whether the brain is predicting or correcting, filtering or integrating, all of it unfolds within awareness. The model may change, the guesses may update, but the simple presence of experience persists. So we find ourselves in an intriguing position. The world you see is shaped by the brain. The self you feel may also be shaped by the brain. Reality, as you know it, is an evolving internal model tuned for survival. And still, beneath the modelling and predicting, there is the quiet glow of consciousness itself, the place where all models appear. As we continue, we will gently explore how stable that constructed self truly is, and what happens when its boundaries begin to loosen. But for now, simply notice how effortless your world feels, and how much hidden activity may be shaping it behind the scenes. You do not see the editing, you only see the finished film, and the film feels real. If you close your eyes for a moment, you might notice something very ordinary. You feel as though you are somewhere. Most likely you feel as though you're located behind your eyes, somewhere in the center of your head, looking out at the world. This sense of location feels so obvious that it rarely comes into question. Of course you're inside your body. Of course you're looking out through your eyes. It seems almost strange to even suggest otherwise. And yet, when scientists began studying how the brain creates this sense of where I am, they discovered something quietly surprising. The brain does not simply receive a fixed location of the self, it calculates it. Deep within the brain, there are regions responsible for integrating signals from vision, touch, balance, and movement. These regions combine information about what you see, what you feel on your skin, how your muscles are positioned, and how your inner ear detects gravity. From all of this, the brain constructs a unified sense of perspective. It answers a question you never consciously ask: where is the observer? One small area that plays a role in this integration sits near the upper side of the brain, where different sensory streams meet. When this area is gently disrupted, sometimes by electrical stimulation during medical procedures, people have reported something extraordinary. They feel as though they have shifted, not metaphorically, not emotionally, but spatially. Some describe the sensation of floating above their body, looking down from near the ceiling. Others feel as though their center of awareness has moved slightly behind or beside them. The body remains on the table, but the point of view drifts. These reports are not mystical claims. They occur in controlled clinical environments, and they reveal something important. The sense of being located inside the body can be altered, which means it must be constructed. Even without medical intervention, simple experiments can create milder versions of this shift. In one well-known demonstration, a person places their hand out of sight while looking at a fake rubber hand positioned in front of them. Both the real hand and the rubber hand are gently stroked at the same time. After a short while, many people begin to feel as though the rubber hand belongs to them. If the fake hand is suddenly threatened, they may even flinch. The brain has updated its model. It has decided that the seen hand and the felt touch belong together, and so the boundary of the body subtly expands. If a rubber hand can become mine, then perhaps the body's less fixed than it feels. What we call self may be more like a movable center of perspective, a cursor placed by the brain within a larger simulation. Imagine playing a video game in which you control a character. You do not mistake yourself for the screen, yet your point of view is anchored inside the character. If the game shifts perspective, perhaps moving the camera behind or above, your sense of location shifts with it. In daily life, the brain keeps the camera stable. It anchors your perspective just behind your eyes. It integrates the signals smoothly enough that you never notice the stitching. But the stitching is there. This sense of being inside a body is the result of continuous integration. Vision tells you where the world is. Touch tells you where your skin ends. Balance tells you which way is up. The brain blends these streams into a single coherent position. When the blending is disturbed, the position can move. This realization can feel destabilizing at first. If I am not strictly inside my body, then where am I? Perhaps the better question is, what is the I that feels located? Notice that even if your perspective shifted, even if you imagined floating near the ceiling, there would still be awareness. The scenery might change, but the fact of experience would remain. The location of the observer is flexible. The presence of awareness is constant. This distinction becomes important. The brain appears to generate a model of where I am, in the same way it generates a model of what I see. Both are constructions, both are predictions continuously refined, and yet construction does not mean false. it means functional. You need a stable sense of location to reach for a glass of water without spilling it. You need a stable body boundary to avoid walking into walls. Evolution favoured a consistent anchor point. But consistency is not the same as permanence. Under certain conditions, extreme stress, trauma, meditation, or neurological disruption, the anchor can loosen. The sense of being a fixed observer can soften. And when it softens, something curious happens. People often report a widening, a spaciousness, a feeling that awareness is not tightly confined to the body after all. Whether this reflects a change in neural processing or something deeper is still debated. But what is clear is that the everyday sense of me, right here inside this body, is not as absolute as it feels. It is an ongoing calculation. The body itself is also part of this calculation. Signals from the heart, the lungs, the stomach, all are woven into the self-model. You feel hunger, you feel warmth, you feel tension. These signals contribute to the story of being a self. But the story is updated moment by moment. You are not a fixed point in space. You are a dynamic integration of signals, a perspective continuously stabilized by the brain. And still, beneath that stabilization, there is awareness itself. Whether the camera is placed here or there, whether the boundaries feel tight or wide, experience continues. So tonight, as you sit or lie down, notice the subtle sense of being somewhere. Notice how natural it feels to be behind the eyes. Then gently consider that this feeling too may be part of the construction. The world appears within awareness. The body appears within awareness. And the sense of being located inside the body may be just one more elegant feature of the model. The observer may not be trapped inside the body. It may simply be the viewpoint the brain has chosen, for now. There is a quiet assumption most of us carry without noticing. We assume that the voice inside our mind, the one that explains, justifies, remembers, and plans, is a reliable narrator. When you decide to make tea, you feel that you chose to make tea. When you feel irritated, you can explain why. When someone asks why you did something, you provide a reason. It feels seamless. But in the 20th century, a series of unusual medical procedures revealed something deeply intriguing about this sense of unity. In certain cases of severe epilepsy, surgeons would carefully separate the large bridge of nerve fibers connecting the two halves of the brain. This bridge normally allows the left and right hemispheres to communicate. When it is severed, each half can no longer easily share information with the other. After recovery, these patients appeared mostly normal. They could speak, move, and interact. But when researchers designed clever experiments, something remarkable emerged. Information shown only to the right side of the brain, for example, by flashing an image to the left visual field, could influence behavior without the speaking half of the brain knowing why. In some cases, a patient might stand up and begin walking. When asked why, the speaking hemisphere would calmly invent a reason. "I'm going to get a drink," the patient might say, but the real cause, the image that triggered the movement, had been presented to the non-speaking side of the brain. The speaking hemisphere did not have access to that information, and yet it refused to say, "I don't know." Instead, it created a story. This tendency has been called the interpreter function. One half of the brain seems especially eager to maintain coherence. It stitches together actions and explanations into a smooth narrative, even when information is missing, even when the true cause is unknown. The mind prefers a complete story to an honest gap. This discovery does not mean that your thoughts are random or meaningless. It means that the sense of a unified I may be more like an ongoing commentary than a central commander. Imagine watching a live sports game with a commentator, describing what is happening. The commentator provides context, interpretation, even motivation. but the commentator is not controlling the players. In a similar way, parts of your brain generate actions and impulses before your inner narrator explains them. Sometimes the explanation comes after the action has already begun. You may have experienced this in small ways. You reach for your phone without consciously deciding to. Only afterward do you think, "I wanted to check a message." You feel tense and later create a story about why. The sequence is subtle, but research suggests that many actions are initiated before the conscious narrative catches up. This does not make you powerless. It simply suggests that the conscious self may not be the origin of every decision. It may be the storyteller that makes sense of them. In ordinary life, this storytelling function is incredibly useful. It allows you to maintain continuity across time. It weaves yesterday's events into today's identity. It supports planning, morality, and social interaction. Without narrative coherence, life would feel fragmented. But the split brain findings hint at something profound. The unity of self may be an achievement, not a given. When communication between hemispheres is reduced, behavior can become more divided. It is as if two streams of processing can operate in parallel. Yet from the outside, the person still appears singular. The appearance of unity persists. This suggests that consciousness might not be a single, indivisible substance. It may be a coordinated pattern, multiple processes synchronized into the illusion of one center, and still, the illusion works so well that we rarely question it. The mind is deeply invested in consistency. When confronted with ambiguity, it resolves it quickly. When memory is incomplete, it fills in the blanks. When motives are unclear, it supplies them. This is not deception in the malicious sense, it is stabilization. Think of a patchwork quilt. Individual pieces of fabric are sewn together into a seamless whole. From a distance, you see a unified pattern. Only up close do you notice the stitching. The self may be something like that quilt, a woven pattern of perception, memory, language, and expectation. And yet, beneath the narrative layer, awareness remains. Even if the story shifts, even if the explanations change, the fact of experience continues. You can observe the storyteller. Right now, as you listen, you may notice thoughts commenting on what is being said. You may notice agreement, curiosity, or resistance. Those comments are part of the narrative system, but there is also the quiet space in which those comments appear. The storyteller is not the entirety of consciousness, it is a feature within it. This distinction becomes increasingly important as we move forward. If the self is partly a constructed narrative, and if that narrative can divide or confabulate under certain conditions, then perhaps the sense of being a fixed inner agent is less solid than it seems. The mind may be more like a flowing process than a single thing. And as we gently examine this process, we begin to see that what feels indivisible may, in fact, be composed of many cooperating parts, still working together, still presenting as one, but perhaps more fluid than we once imagined. If the self were a solid object, something fixed and indivisible, then it would remain the same in every circumstance. But your own life quietly suggests otherwise. There are moments when you feel vividly present, alert, sharp, engaged. Your thoughts are clear, your sense of identity stable, your awareness bright and focused. And there are other moments, the hazy minutes just after waking, when you're not entirely sure where you are, the drifting state before sleep, when thoughts loosen and images blend, the deep absorption in music or conversation, when the sense of me softens into the background. The self does not switch on and off like a light bulb. It glows, sometimes brightly, sometimes dimly. Scientists who study consciousness increasingly describe it not as an all-or-nothing property, but as a continuum. Within a single day, Your level of awareness fluctuates. Across a lifetime, it develops and changes. Across species, it may appear in varying degrees of richness and complexity. Consider sleep. During deep, dreamless sleep, there may be little or no remembered experience. The narrative self, the storyteller we explored earlier, is largely silent. The sense of identity fades. Yet when you awaken, you do not feel as though you were erased. Something persisted, even if memory did not. During dreaming, awareness takes a different form. The world of the dream feels real while it lasts. You may have a sense of being a character inside that dream. Yet the physical body lies still. The brain generates an entire environment internally. The self shifts its stage. Under anesthesia, awareness can fade even more completely. Certain medications reduce the brain's ability to integrate signals across distant regions. When integration drops below a certain threshold, reports of experience disappear. From the outside, the body may still breathe and move reflexively, but the inner light of awareness dims or vanishes, and yet in many cases it can return. This suggests that consciousness depends on patterns of activity rather than a permanent substance. When those patterns are disrupted, awareness weakens. When they are restored, awareness brightens again. Even in waking life, the intensity of self varies. During moments of extreme focus, perhaps when playing a sport or solving a problem, the narrative voice may fall quiet. Action flows without commentary. Time can feel altered. Afterwards, you may struggle to explain exactly what happened, only that you were fully immersed. In trauma, something different can occur. Some individuals report feeling detached from their body, as if watching events from a distance. The brain, under overwhelming stress, may reduce emotional integration. The self loosens its grip as a protective measure. Meditation practices offer yet another variation. With sustained attention and training, people sometimes report that the sense of being a separate observer softens. Thoughts continue, sensations continue, but the boundary around me becomes less rigid. These shifts are not rare anomalies. They are part of the natural variability of consciousness. Even across species, we see differences. A dog likely experiences the world richly, with smells and emotions and immediate presence, but it probably does not construct the same complex narrative about its past and future. A bee may have a more limited experiential range still, and yet many researchers now believe that awareness exists on a gradient rather than appearing suddenly at one sharp point. The self, then, may be something that scales. It may become more complex as systems become more integrated and capable of representing themselves across time, but its foundations, sensation, responsiveness, experience, may extend further down the tree of life than we once assumed. Within a single human brain, the same scaling applies. Think of the self as a dimmer switch rather than a binary switch. The light of awareness can glow intensely, flicker gently, or recede into near darkness. The narrative identity can be vivid or barely present. The sense of agency can be strong or diffuse, and yet even when dimmed, something often remains. A faint background awareness, a subtle presence. You may notice this in the moments just before sleep. As thoughts fragment and images blur, there can still be a soft knowing that experience is occurring. The storyteller is quiet, the boundaries are soft, but awareness has not completely vanished. This variability suggests that what we call self is not a fixed entity, housed in one location. It is an emergent pattern, a dynamic balance of integration, memory, sensation, and narrative. When the pattern is tight and coordinated, the self feels solid. When coordination loosens, the self feels fluid. Importantly, this does not reduce you to a mechanical process. It simply reframes the self as something living and adaptive. The brain continuously weaves together signals from the body, memories from the past, predictions about the future, and perceptions of the present. The strength of that weaving determines how stable the self appears. And because the weaving changes, the self changes. Notice tonight how your own sense of identity shifts as you relax. Perhaps the urgency of the day softens. Perhaps the internal commentary slows. Perhaps the boundary between you and the surrounding space feels less pronounced. Nothing dramatic needs to happen, just a slight dimming. In that dimming, you can glimpse the flexibility of what you usually take to be fixed. The self is not a rigid core, it is a pattern of light, sometimes bright, sometimes gentle, always moving, always adjusting. And as we continue, we will explore what happens when that pattern loosens even further, and what might remain when the narrative center grows quiet. If you sit quietly and allow your thoughts to wander, you may notice a particular kind of thinking that arises almost automatically. You replay conversations, you imagine future scenarios, you wonder how others see you, you recall something you regret, you anticipate something you hope for. This gentle stream of self-related thinking feels natural. It feels like you. But brain imaging studies suggest that this ongoing narrative activity is associated with a particular constellation of brain regions that often activate together when you are reflecting on yourself, remembering your past or imagining your future. Rather than using its technical abbreviation, we can describe it simply as the brain's narrative network. When this network is active, your life story feels vivid. The sense of being a continuous person stretching from yesterday into tomorrow is reinforced. The storyteller is fully awake. When this network becomes quieter, something interesting happens. Under certain conditions, such as deep meditation, intense absorption, or even specific altered states induced in clinical research, activity in this narrative network can decrease. As it does, people often report a reduction in self-focused thinking. They describe feeling less preoccupied with me and my story, less concerned with how they appear, less trapped inside mental commentary. Some describe a widening sense of perspective. Others report a feeling of unity with their surroundings. The boundaries that usually separate self from world soften. Importantly, these reports arise across very different contexts. Long-term meditation practitioners describe similar states after years of training. Individuals undergoing guided therapeutic sessions with carefully administered compounds have reported comparable reductions in ego boundary intensity. Even in certain spontaneous peak experiences, moments of awe in nature, for example, the sense of being a separate self can temporarily dissolve into something larger, different paths, similar phenomenology. This convergence is striking. It suggests that the solidity of the ego may depend on specific patterns of brain activity. When those patterns shift, the experience of me shifts with them. Again, this does not mean that the self is unreal in a dismissive sense. It means that its intensity and boundaries are regulated. Imagine the narrative network as a radio playing the soundtrack of your identity. Most of the time, the volume is set to a comfortable level. You hear your thoughts clearly. You know who you are in relation to your past and future. But if the volume lowers, the room becomes quieter. Other sounds, subtle sensations, ambient awareness become more noticeable. In meditation, practitioners often train attention to rest on the breath or on simple bodily sensations. Over time, this practice can reduce the dominance of narrative thinking. The story pauses. The immediate field of experience becomes more vivid. Similarly, in moments of awe, perhaps standing beneath a vast night sky, the usual preoccupation with personal concerns can fade. The mind grows quiet. The sense of separation diminishes. Researchers studying these states have found correlations between decreased activity in narrative-related brain regions and reports of ego dissolution. Translated softly, this means that when the brain quiets the systems that maintain your autobiography, the felt sense of being a separate individual can soften. This does not require mystical interpretation. It is consistent with the idea that the self is a constructed model, one that can be modulated. But here is where the question deepens. When the narrative quiets, awareness does not disappear. People do not report becoming blank or unconscious. Instead, they often describe feeling more present, more open, less constrained by self-concern. If the storyteller grows silent and awareness remains, then the storyteller cannot be the entirety of consciousness. It is a component within it. Think of clouds drifting across the sky. The clouds shape what you see. They form patterns, sometimes dramatic, sometimes gentle. But when the clouds thin, the sky does not vanish. It becomes more apparent. The narrative network may be like those clouds. It gives shape to identity. It creates the drama of personal life. But beneath it lies a wider field of awareness that is not dependent on constant self-commentary. This insight does not negate the importance of narrative. Your life story matters. Memory matters. Planning matters. Social identity matters. But perhaps the narrative self is not the deepest layer. Perhaps it is an adaptive overlay, useful, powerful and flexible. As you relax tonight, you might experiment gently. Notice a thought about yourself. Notice how quickly the mind frames experience in terms of me. Then allow that thought to pass without following it. What remains? There may still be sound, breath, sensation, space. The sense of being a character in a story may loosen slightly. The sense of simple presence may remain. This subtle shift hints at something profound. The self we defend so carefully may be only one mode of consciousness, and if it can soften, expand, or temporarily dissolve while awareness persists, then our exploration must widen as well. The brain may construct the narrative self, but consciousness might not be limited to the story. Up to this point, we have gently loosened the solidity of the self. We have seen that perception is constructed, that location is calculated, that narrative coherence can be stitched together after the fact, that the sense of me can soften or intensify depending on brain activity, and yet, here you are, stable enough to recognize your name, consistent enough to remember your past, capable of planning for tomorrow. If the self is constructed, why does it feel so real? And perhaps more importantly, why would the brain build it at all? To answer that, we need to think not only like neuroscientists but like evolution. Imagine a creature without a stable sense of self. It feels sensations. It reacts to stimuli. But it does not remember its own history as a continuous story. It does not anticipate its future in personal terms. It does not think, I was there yesterday, and I will be here tomorrow. Such a creature might survive in a simple environment. But in a complex social world, continuity matters. You need to remember who helped you and who harmed you. You need to anticipate the consequences of your actions. You need to coordinate your behavior with others who also perceive themselves as individuals. The self-model may have emerged as a powerful organizing tool. Some philosophers have suggested that what we call self is not a substance or an inner soul, but a bundle, a collection of perceptions, memories, intentions, and sensations woven together. The brain gathers these elements and presents them as a unified character, not because unity is metaphysically necessary, but because unity is useful. Think of the self as the brain's most sophisticated prediction model. It predicts not only the external world, but your own behavior within it. It keeps track of your body, your social identity, your goals, your past experiences. It creates a coherent center around which decisions can be organized. Without that center, life would feel fragmented. Imagine waking up each day without the memory that yesterday happened to you. Without the expectation that tomorrow will also belong to you, planning would collapse, responsibility would blur, motivation would weaken. The self-model anchors continuity. It is like a thread running through beads of experience, linking them into a necklace rather than leaving them scattered. From this perspective, calling the self an illusion can be misleading. An illusion suggests something false, something deceptive. But a more compassionate framing is this: the self is a simulation. It is a virtual model the brain uses to navigate the world. Consider a map on your phone. The blue dot shows where you are. That dot is not literally you, it is a representation, a useful abstraction. It simplifies the vast complexity of your physical body into a single point that can move across the screen. The brain may create something similar internally, a simplified representation of me that allows it to track actions and outcomes efficiently. The blue dot is not fake, it is functional. Likewise, the self-model may not be ultimately fundamental, but it is profoundly adaptive. Even the storyteller we examined earlier plays a role. By generating coherent explanations, the mind stabilizes social interactions. When someone asks why you did something, the narrative system provides a reason. This strengthens trust and predictability within communities. Coherence promotes cooperation. From an evolutionary standpoint, that matters. But here is where the paradox deepens. The self is useful. The self is adaptive. The self is a model. And yet, we experience it as absolute. The brain does not label the self as a simulation. It presents it as reality. The model is so convincing that we mistake it for the thing itself. This may be necessary. If you constantly questioned your own identity, survival would become difficult. Stability allows decisive action, but stability can also create rigidity. When the self is treated as permanent and separate, fear intensifies. Threats feel personal. Loss feels annihilating. Criticism feels like attack. The same model that supports survival can also generate suffering. Understanding the self as constructed does not erase it. It softens it. It allows flexibility. You can still use the model, still plan, love, strive, while recognizing that the model is not the deepest layer of reality. Imagine wearing a well-fitted coat. It keeps you warm. It protects you from the wind. But you do not confuse the coat with your skin. When the weather changes, you can loosen it or remove it. Perhaps the self is similar, a necessary garment shaped by evolution. It helps you function in a social world. It organizes memory and intention. It creates continuity. But beneath it, there may be something quieter, awareness itself, not confined to narrative. This realization does not require abandoning science or embracing mysticism. It simply invites humility. The brain builds models to survive. The self is one of its most elegant constructions, and as we move forward, we will begin to examine moments when that construction seems to falter, especially at the edge of life and death, and ask whether those cracks reveal only neural dynamics or something more. For now, rest with this gentle insight. The self feels solid because it works. It persists because it helps. It appears unified because unity serves survival. But usefulness does not guarantee ultimacy. The blue dot moves across the map, and behind the map there is still the open sky. There are moments in human life that feel like thresholds. Moments when the ordinary structure of experience loosens. Moments when the sense of self, so carefully maintained, begins to thin. Few thresholds are as dramatic as the boundary between life and death. Across cultures and centuries, people who have come close to dying have described experiences that feel deeply vivid and transformative. They speak of moving through darkness toward light, of feeling detached from the body, of reviewing their lives in panoramic clarity, of encountering overwhelming peace. Modern medicine has made it possible for more people to survive cardiac arrest and other life-threatening conditions, and with survival has come something new: documentation. Researchers have collected structured interviews. They have developed scales to measure the intensity and content of near-death experiences. Hospitals have attempted to test whether awareness persists when the brain appears inactive. The findings are complex. Some survivors report clear memories of events that occurred while their heart was not beating. In certain cases, individuals have described details from the hospital room that they could not have easily seen from their physical position. At the same time, neuroscience offers possible explanations rooted in physiology. When the brain is deprived of oxygen, its normal patterns of activity can destabilize. Chemical balances shift. Electrical rhythms become disorganized. In animal studies, researchers have observed brief surges of synchronized activity in the moments after cardiac arrest, bursts that may correlate with intense internal experiences. Stress hormones flood the system. Sensory boundaries blur. The brain, struggling to integrate signals under extreme conditions, may generate vivid internal imagery. The life review phenomenon, for example, might reflect rapid activation of memory networks. The tunnel-like imagery could arise from changes in visual processing as blood flow decreases. These hypotheses do not diminish the power of the experience. They attempt to map it, and yet there remains uncertainty. Brain activity during cardiac arrest is difficult to measure precisely. Traditional monitoring devices capture only surface electrical signals. They do not provide a complete picture of deeper neural processes. Timing is critical. Memories may form during the process of losing consciousness, during partial recovery, or in the moments immediately after. Scientific caution is essential. It is tempting to declare near-death experiences either definitive proof of consciousness beyond the brain or definitive proof of neural hallucination. But the honest position remains more humble. We do not yet know. What we do know is that near-death experiences often share common themes: a sense of detachment from the body, a feeling of peace, an altered perception of time, a reduction of fear. Interestingly, many of these themes overlap with other states we've already discussed. In deep meditation, practitioners sometimes report a dissolution of ego boundaries and a sense of timeless awareness. In certain altered states induced in controlled therapeutic contexts, individuals describe similar reductions in fear and expansions of perspective. Different causes, similar phenomenology. This convergence does not settle the debate, but it invites curiosity. Perhaps under extreme physiological stress, the narrative network we discussed earlier quiets dramatically. The self-model destabilizes. The brain may shift into an unusual mode of integration. When the ordinary filters weaken, experience may widen, or perhaps these experiences point to something more fundamental, a layer of consciousness not entirely dependent on typical neural coordination. Science continues to investigate. Hospitals conduct carefully designed studies. Philosophers analyze interpretations. Neuroscientists refine models of integration and collapse. Meanwhile, individuals who have undergone near-death experiences often describe lasting changes: reduced fear of death, increased compassion, a sense that identity is less confined to the body. Regardless of the ultimate explanation, the psychological impact is real. At the edge of life, the self may loosen in ways that reveal how contingent it is. The usual boundaries, or so firm in everyday life, can become permeable. Imagine the self as a tightly woven net. Under normal conditions, it holds together securely. Under extreme strain, the net stretches, threads separate slightly, light passes through. Whether that light originates entirely from neural processes or reflects something deeper remains open. But what becomes clear is this: the self we defend so fiercely may not be as fixed as we believe. Even in the face of death, awareness, or at least the memory of awareness, can feel present. And this brings us back to our central question. If consciousness depends entirely on the brain, then near-death experiences must ultimately be explainable in neural terms. If consciousness is fundamental, then perhaps the brain is a gateway rather than a generator. At present, evidence does not decisively confirm either view. What we can say is that at the threshold of life, the narrative self often loosens. Fear may dissolve, perspective may widen, identity may feel less bounded. The edge reveals flexibility, and as we continue our exploration, we will turn from this dramatic threshold to a quieter philosophical challenge, the difficulty of measuring consciousness at all. Because before we can decide what consciousness is, we must ask how we could ever step outside it to observe it. For now, simply notice the fragility of the self. It feels solid until it doesn't, and in that softening, something else may become visible. Science is remarkably good at studying objects. It measures stars by the light they emit. It measures cells by their chemical exchanges. It measures the brain by its electrical rhythms and blood flow. Every scientific instrument points outward, towards something that can be observed, recorded, compared. But consciousness introduces a subtle complication. Consciousness is not only something that can be studied, it is also the condition that makes studying possible. Every experiment, every equation, every observation, all of it appears within experience. Even the scientist, peering at a brain scan, is aware of the image on the screen, and this creates a peculiar loop. To study consciousness, we must use consciousness. Imagine trying to bite your own teeth, or trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. There is a structural difficulty built into the task. The brain can be scanned, electrical patterns can be recorded, regions can be stimulated, but the lived experience, the redness of red, the taste of sweetness, the feeling of sadness, is available only from the inside. This distinction is sometimes described as the difference between third-person data and first-person experience. Third-person data can be shared publicly. Brain activity patterns can be compared across individuals. Behavioral responses can be quantified. These are powerful tools. First-person experience, however, is private in a fundamental way. You can describe your pain, but no one else can directly feel it. You can describe the way blue looks to you, but the quality itself remains yours. Philosophers have long puzzled over this gap. Even if we knew every detail about the physical structure of the brain, every connection, every signal, would that knowledge alone reveal what it feels like to be you? Some argue yes. They believe that once we fully understand the mechanisms, the mystery will dissolve. Others argue that subjective experience may never be fully reducible to external description. The difficulty lies in perspective. Science relies on objectivity, the ability to stand outside what is being studied. But with consciousness, we're never entirely outside. We're always inside looking out. Consider a simple analogy. You're watching a movie on a screen. You can analyze the images, the colors, the sound waves. You can measure the brightness of the display. But the act of watching, the experience of being absorbed in the film, is not captured by the pixels themselves. The screen can be described from the outside, The experience unfolds from within. When neuroscientists study the brain, they identify patterns correlated with experience. If certain regions coordinate in particular ways, people report being awake. If those patterns fragment, people report losing awareness. These correlations are invaluable. They map the relationship between physical processes and subjective states. But correlation is not the same as identity. If brain activity and experience always occur together, does that mean one causes the other? Does it mean they are two descriptions of the same underlying reality? Or does it suggest a deeper structure we do not yet grasp? Some philosophers propose that consciousness and physical processes may be two aspects of a single phenomenon, like the inside and outside of a coin. From one side, you see the physical description. From the other, you see experience. Others maintain that the physical account will eventually be sufficient, and still others suggest that consciousness may be more fundamental than matter itself. The measurement paradox does not resolve these debates. It simply clarifies why they persist. Because consciousness cannot be fully objectified. Even when you turn attention inward, observing your own thoughts, you remain within the field of awareness. You cannot step outside awareness to inspect it from a distance. Notice this now. You can observe a thought arise. You can notice a sensation in your body. You can even notice the feeling of being an observer. But what notices all of that? There seems to be a simple, undeniable presence in which experience occurs. It does not present itself as an object. It does not have colour or shape. It is the background of all appearances. This does not automatically imply that consciousness is cosmic or fundamental. It simply highlights its unique status. Everything else can become an object of awareness. Awareness itself does not easily become an object. And so, science faces a subtle challenge. It can map the footprints of consciousness in the brain. It can track when integration increases or decreases. It can measure complexity of signals, coordination across networks, and patterns of synchronization. But the essence of experience, the what it is like, resists direct measurement. This does not mean it is beyond science forever. It means the method may need to evolve. Some researchers explore combining first-person reports with brain data. Others investigate mathematical measures of integration, attempting to quantify how unified a system is. Yet even the most refined models must ultimately return to lived experience for validation. We ask participants, were you aware? Did you dream? Did you feel present? The answers come from within. In this way, consciousness stands at the edge of our explanatory frameworks. It is both the subject and the condition of subjectivity, and this leaves us in a delicate position. We cannot dismiss consciousness as trivial, because it is the ground of all knowledge. We cannot easily capture it in equations, because it is not merely an object among objects, so the mystery persists, not as a failure of science, but as a reflection of the uniqueness of what we are attempting to understand. Before we decide whether consciousness is constructed or fundamental, we must acknowledge this structural peculiarity. The light by which we see the world cannot be fully illuminated by another light. It is already shining. And as we move forward, we will gently explore whether that light might extend beyond the boundaries we usually assume. So far, we have explored the brain's architecture, the construction of perception, the weaving of the self, and even the fragile boundary between life and death. Now we turn inward in a quieter way, not toward theory, not toward measurement, but towards something you can notice directly. Right now, there is experience. Perhaps there is the sound of my voice. Perhaps there is the sensation of your body resting. Perhaps there are thoughts drifting in and out. Within this field of experience, something moves. Attention. Attention shifts from sound to sensation, from sensation to memory, from memory to imagination. It scans, it highlights, it selects. Attention is like a flashlight in a dark room. Wherever it points, details become vivid. Wherever it turns away, details fade into the background. But notice something subtle. The flashlight moves, the room remains. In some contemplative traditions, a distinction is made between attention and awareness. Attention is directional. It has an object. It focuses on something. Awareness, by contrast, is the open space in which attention moves. When you focus on your breath, attention rests on the rhythm of inhaling and exhaling. When a thought interrupts, attention shifts to that thought. When a sound arises, attention turns again. Yet throughout all these movements, there is a simple fact. Experience is happening. The background presence does not seem to move in the same way that attention does. Imagine sitting beside a river at dusk. Leaves float past on the surface. Ripples shimmer in changing light. Occasionally a fish breaks the water. The leaves are like thoughts. The ripples are like sensations. The fish are like sudden emotions. Attention follows these movements, tracking one leaf, then another. But the river itself continues flowing whether you track it or not. Awareness may be more like the river than the leaves. You can test this gently. Let your attention rest on a sound in the room. Notice its tone, its subtle variations. Then shift attention to a bodily sensation, perhaps the feeling of your hands. Then allow a thought to arise and observe it briefly. Each time attention moves, but something does not need to move in order for any of this to appear. Even when there are few thoughts, in the quiet moments before sleep, for example, awareness does not vanish entirely. There may be little content, but there is still a faint presence. Some researchers studying meditation have described states in which the content of experience becomes minimal. Very little narrative thinking, very little imagery, and yet individuals report that awareness remains clear. They are not unconscious, they are not dreaming, they are simply resting without much happening. This challenges a common assumption that consciousness is identical to thought. Thought comes and goes. Awareness appears more continuous. Notice how thoughts can change rapidly. You can think about tomorrow, then yesterday, then something completely unrelated. Thoughts can contradict one another. They can argue, plan, worry. But the fact that you are aware of these thoughts feels more stable. This does not automatically prove that awareness exists independently of the brain. It simply points to a structural distinction within experience. Attention is selective and dynamic. Awareness is the condition in which selection occurs. In ordinary life, we're often so absorbed in the movement of attention that we overlook the background. We identify with the thoughts themselves. We assume the voice in the mind is the center. But if you soften your focus, you may notice that thoughts arise within a larger field. This field does not announce itself. It does not speak. It does not comment. It simply allows. When attention becomes very quiet, perhaps during meditation or deep rest, the narrative self can fade. The sense of being a separate character with a detailed biography can loosen. Yet awareness does not necessarily disappear with it. Some describe this as a feeling of spaciousness, others as simple presence. Again, interpretation varies. Some frame it in spiritual language, others in psychological terms. For our purposes, we can remain simple. Attention moves. Awareness does not seem to move in the same way. If you close your eyes now and let thoughts slow, you may still notice that experience continues. Even if nothing in particular is happening, there is a subtle knowing of that nothing. This quiet distinction opens a new possibility. If awareness is not identical to thought, and not identical to narrative identity, then perhaps consciousness is deeper than the self model. Perhaps the self, with its history, preferences and fears, is a pattern appearing within awareness rather than the source of awareness itself. This is not a conclusion. It is an invitation to observe. As you rest tonight, notice the movements of attention, the way it flickers from one object to another, and then notice the silent backdrop against which those movements occur. The flashlight sweeps, the room remains, and in that remaining there is something steady, something that does not need to chase the leaves drifting on the river's surface. It simply is. As we sit with the distinction between attention and awareness, a quiet question begins to form. If awareness is not identical to thought, if it remains even when narrative quiets, then what exactly is the relationship between the brain and consciousness? The dominant view in neuroscience today is that the brain generates consciousness, that when neural activity reaches certain patterns of integration and coordination, experience arises. When those patterns weaken, experience fades. This view is supported by strong evidence. Injure the brain and consciousness changes. Disrupt communication between regions and awareness can fragment. Administer anesthesia and experience can disappear. The correlations are powerful, and yet, throughout history, some thinkers have suggested another possibility. Instead of imagining the brain as a generator of consciousness, what if it functions more like a filter? Over a century ago, the psychologist and philosopher William James proposed what he called a transmission theory. He suggested that the brain might not produce consciousness from nothing, but rather transmit or limit a more fundamental field of awareness. Later writers described the brain as a reducing valve, narrowing a vast range of possible experience down to what is useful for survival. Imagine sunlight passing through a prism. White light contains many colours, but as it moves through the prism, the colours separate, bend, and become visible in particular ways. Now imagine something slightly different. Imagine that awareness is like white light, broad, undivided, expansive. The brain, in this metaphor, is not creating the light. It is shaping it, narrowing it, focusing it into a particular beam we call personal experience. This is only a metaphor, but it captures the intuition behind the filter hypothesis. Under normal conditions, the brain restricts awareness to a specific perspective. This body, this history, this narrative. It filters out what is irrelevant. It stabilizes identity. It keeps perception aligned with survival needs. In altered states, whether through meditation, trauma, or other unusual conditions, the filter may loosen, experience may widen. The sense of being confined to a single identity may soften. From this perspective, the brain's role is not to generate awareness, but to limit and structure it. Of course, this idea is controversial. Many neuroscientists argue that there is no need to posit a broader field of consciousness. The observed changes in experience can be explained entirely by changes in neural processing. When the brain reorganizes, experience reorganizes. There is no independent light behind the prism, only the glass and the bending. And yet the filter hypothesis persists because it attempts to address a particular difficulty. If consciousness emerges only from matter, then at some point in evolutionary history, subjective experience must have arisen from non-experiencing components. The jump from physical process to felt experience remains conceptually puzzling for some thinkers. The filter model inverts the direction. Instead of matter producing mind, mind may be primary and matter may constrain it. Again, this is not a conclusion, it is a proposal. We must be careful not to leap beyond evidence. The fact that awareness feels spacious or unbounded in certain states does not prove that it exists independently of the brain. Subjective impressions can be powerful without being metaphysical revelations. At the same time, the filter idea invites humility. The correlations between brain activity and experience are undeniable, but correlation alone does not settle the deeper ontological question whether the brain is creating, revealing, or shaping something more fundamental. Imagine tuning a radio. The music you hear depends on the condition of the radio. Damage the circuitry, and the sound distorts. Remove power, and the music ceases. Does this mean the radio produces the music? Or does it mean the radio receives and shapes signals that exist beyond it? In everyday engineering, we know the answer. Radios receive broadcasts. But when it comes to consciousness, the analogy may or may not hold. The brain may be more like a generator than a receiver, or it may contain aspects of both. The filter hypothesis does not deny neuroscience. It reframes interpretation. It suggests that what we call the self, this tightly organized perspective, might be a narrowing of something wider. As you lie here tonight, consider the possibility gently. What if awareness is not confined inside your skull? What if the sense of being a separate self is a focusing of a broader field? You do not need to believe this. You do not need to reject it. Simply notice how experience feels. Does awareness have a clear boundary? Can you locate its edge precisely? Or does it seem to extend as far as perception extends? When you hear a distant sound, does awareness stop at your skin? Or does it include the sound within its field? These questions do not resolve the debate, but they soften assumptions. The filter hypothesis stands as one philosophical possibility among others. It reminds us that our current models, however advanced, may not yet capture the full structure of reality. Whether the brain generates consciousness or shapes it, something remarkable remains true. Experience is happening. The prism bends the light. The radio shapes the signal. The brain organizes the self. But what lies behind these metaphors remains open, and as we move forward, we will examine another bold idea, that perhaps consciousness is not an add-on to matter, but an intrinsic aspect of it. For now, let the question linger without urgency. The light shines. How it shines is still unfolding. We have now arrived at a turning point. If the brain generates consciousness, then awareness emerges from matter. If the brain filters consciousness, then awareness may be more fundamental than matter. There is another possibility that attempts to bridge these views. Some philosophers and scientists have proposed that consciousness is not something that suddenly appears at a certain level of complexity. Instead, it may be woven into the fabric of reality itself, present in even the simplest physical systems in a very minimal way. This view is sometimes called Panpsychism. The word can sound intimidating, but its core suggestion is gentle. It proposes that every physical system may have two aspects, an outer description and an inner description. The outer description is what physics gives us: mass, charge, motion, energy, structure. These are properties that can be measured from the outside. The inner description, according to this view, is what it is like to be that system from within. For very simple systems, this what it is like might be unimaginably faint. Nothing like human experience, not thoughts, not feelings, not self-awareness, just a minimal interiority. Think of it not as tiny minds inside atoms, but as the idea that reality may have an inside as well as an outside. Consider a coin. From one side you see one face, from the other side you see another. The coin itself is one object, but it has two aspects. Similarly, matter might have an external aspect, described by physics, and an internal aspect, described by experience. Under this view, human consciousness does not arise from non-conscious matter. Rather, it is a highly organized form of something that was always present in simpler forms. This avoids what some philosophers call the hard jump, the leap from purely physical processes to subjective experience. Instead of asking how experience emerges from nothing, the question becomes how simple interiority combines into richer forms. This is sometimes called the combination problem. How do tiny flickers of interiority, if they exist, come together to form the unified field of awareness you experience now? Various models attempt to address this. Some researchers propose that when parts of a system become deeply integrated, when they influence each other in complex and unified ways, the inside of that system becomes correspondingly unified. To translate this softly, when components of a system are strongly connected and work together as one whole, the system may have a richer inner life than when the components are isolated. Imagine individual musicians scattered across a field, each playing alone. The sounds do not blend. There is no shared rhythm. Now imagine those musicians coming together into an orchestra. They coordinate. They listen to each other. They respond in harmony. The result is not just louder sound. It is structured music, layered, unified, expressive. Panpsychism suggests that something similar may occur with consciousness. Elementary systems may have only the faintest glimmer of interiority. But when billions of neurons interact in highly integrated ways, that interiority becomes complex, layered, and self-reflective. In this way, consciousness would be fundamental in one sense, present everywhere in minimal form, yet emergent in another sense, growing in richness as systems become more complex. Some contemporary theories attempt to quantify how integrated a system is. They explore mathematical ways to describe how unified and irreducible a network's activity becomes. The greater the integration, the richer the potential interior experience. We do not need to dwell on equations. The intuitive idea is enough. Unity of structure may correspond to unity of experience. Of course, not everyone accepts this view. Critics argue that attributing interiority to basic matter risks empty speculation. Others maintain that the explanatory gap between physical processes and experience remains even if we assign interiority to atoms. Panpsychism does not eliminate mystery, it redistributes it. Instead of asking how consciousness arises from unconscious matter, we ask how simple experiential aspects combine into complex ones. And yet, there is something quietly appealing about the idea that consciousness is not an accident, that it did not suddenly ignite in a cold universe, but reflects a deeper continuity. If this were true, the universe would not be fundamentally dead at its base. It would have an inner dimension everywhere, faint in simple systems, vivid in complex ones. Again, this is a philosophical possibility, not an established scientific fact. It invites us to reconsider the assumption that matter is entirely devoid of interiority until complexity reaches a certain threshold. As you rest tonight, imagine the simplest possible physical system, perhaps a single particle or a tiny vibration of energy. Under the panpsychist view, even that minimal system would have an outer description and perhaps an inner aspect so faint that it bears no resemblance to human awareness. Then imagine complexity increasing, structures forming, patterns stabilizing, integration deepening. Eventually, in one small region of the universe, a brain forms just a network of extraordinary intricacy. The inner aspect shaped by this integration becomes what you call consciousness. Whether this vision is correct remains uncertain, but it gently widens the frame. Instead of consciousness appearing from nowhere, it may reflect the inner side of a universe that was never entirely without depth. As we continue, we will explore a contrasting idea, that consciousness does not exist in simple systems at all, but emerges only when complexity reaches a critical threshold. Two paths, both seeking to explain the same quiet miracle, that something, somewhere feels like something, and that somewhere is here. If Panpsychism suggests that consciousness is everywhere in faint form, Emergence offers a different picture. It proposes that consciousness is not present in simple systems at all. Instead, it arises only when parts come together in the right way. To understand this idea, it helps to think about emergence more generally. An emergent property is something that appears when components interact in complex ways, even though none of the components possess that property individually. Consider water. A single molecule of water does not have the property of wetness. Wetness emerges when many molecules interact in a particular structure. It is a collective phenomenon, or think of a flock of birds moving across the sky. Each bird follows simple rules: adjust speed, maintain distance, align direction. But together, they create sweeping patterns that look almost choreographed. No single bird contains the whole pattern. The pattern emerges from interaction. Supporters of emergence suggest that consciousness might be similar. Individual neurons fire electrical signals. They transmit chemical messages across tiny gaps. On their own, a single neuron does not appear to have an inner life. But when billions of neurons interact in intricate loops, exchanging signals in coordinated rhythms, something new may appear, a unified field of experience. This perspective aligns closely with much of contemporary neuroscience. Researchers observe that consciousness seems to correlate with large-scale integration across the brain. When distant regions communicate effectively, awareness is present. When communication fragments, during deep sleep, certain seizures or anesthesia, consciousness fades, integration matters. Imagine again the musicians scattered across a field. If each musician plays randomly, there is noise but no music. If they gather and coordinate under a shared rhythm, the sound becomes something more. The symphony is not found inside any one instrument. It exists in the pattern of relationships among them. In the emergent view, consciousness is like the symphony. It is not located in a single neuron, nor even in a small cluster. It is the dynamic pattern formed by billions of interactions. When complexity crosses a certain threshold, when feedback loops become sufficiently rich and unified, subjective experience appears. Before that threshold, there is no experience. After it, there is. This view preserves a kind of physical continuity. It does not require assigning interiority to simple particles. Instead, it suggests that experience is a high-level feature of organized matter. But emergence does not fully dissolve the mystery. The key question remains: why should integrated information feel like something from the inside? We can describe the orchestra. We can map the flow of signals. But at what point does the music become something heard from within? Emergence explains how parts combine. It does not necessarily explain why combination should produce subjectivity. Some thinkers respond that this is simply how reality works. Just as wetness appears when molecules arrange in a certain way, experience appears when neurons arrange in a certain way. There is no further explanation to be given. It is a brute fact of nature. Others find this unsatisfying. They argue that the leap from physical interaction to felt experience remains conceptually puzzling. Still, emergence has strong intuitive appeal. You do not need to imagine faint awareness in rocks or atoms. You need only recognize that certain structures, like brains, possess extraordinary levels of organization. Your brain contains billions of neurons connected by trillions of synapses. Signals cascade in waves, synchronize in oscillations, and loop back on themselves in layered networks. This self-referential integration may create the conditions necessary for experience. To soften the idea, when matter becomes complex enough to model itself, to represent its own states and predict its own changes, Awareness may arise as part of that modelling. The brain not only processes the world, it processes its own processing. In doing so, it may generate the sense of being a subject. Imagine holding a mirror up to another mirror. Reflections bounce back and forth, creating depth where none physically exists. Perhaps consciousness emerges when systems reflect themselves deeply enough. This model keeps everything within the physical domain. There is no need for a broader field of awareness. There is only matter organising itself in ever more intricate ways. Yet even here, humility is appropriate. Emergence describes patterns we observe. It identifies thresholds and correlations. But the intimate feel of experience, the warmth of colour, the ache of longing, the quiet sense of being, still invites wonder. Whether consciousness is fundamental in every particle, or emergent only in certain structures, both views attempt to reconcile the same fact. Experience exists. The emergent view says that when parts become sufficiently unified, a new level of reality appears, not separate from matter, but inseparable from its organisation. As we continue, we will bring this discussion into the present moment, into artificial systems that process information with increasing complexity, and ask a delicate question. If consciousness emerges from integration, could it arise elsewhere? For now, rest with the image of the orchestra. Individual instruments alone, then instruments together, then music filling the hall. Something more appears when parts become a whole. Whether that something more is entirely physical or reflects a deeper dimension remains open. But the symphony is playing, and you are hearing it from within. As we reflect on emergence, on the idea that consciousness might arise when matter becomes sufficiently integrated, a new question naturally unfolds. If consciousness depends on complexity and coordination, could it arise in machines? Today, artificial systems can generate language, compose music, recognize faces, and even carry on conversations. They process enormous volumes of information. They learn patterns. They adapt responses. From the outside, some of these systems appear increasingly intelligent. But intelligence and consciousness are not the same. Intelligence can be described in terms of problem-solving ability, pattern recognition, and flexible behaviour. Consciousness, however, refers to subjective experience, the felt sense of being. A system might perform tasks skillfully without feeling anything at all. Imagine a thermostat adjusting the temperature in a room. It detects changes and responds accordingly. No one assumes the thermostat feels warmth or cold. It executes rules. Now imagine a far more advanced system, one that can describe emotions, write poetry, and answer philosophical questions. It may speak about sadness. It may generate sentences about joy. But does it feel sadness? Does it experience joy? This question lies at the heart of the debate. Behaviour alone does not guarantee inner life. A puppet can mimic human gestures. A computer can simulate conversation. Yet simulation does not automatically imply sentience. There is a philosophical thought experiment that illustrates this tension. Imagine a person inside a room, following detailed instructions to respond to written symbols passed under the door. The person does not understand the language of the symbols. They simply match patterns according to a rulebook. To someone outside the room, the responses appear fluent and intelligent, but inside there is no understanding, only rule following. This thought experiment suggests that producing the correct output does not necessarily entail having the corresponding experience. Of course, artificial systems today are far more complex than simple rule-following machines. They learn from vast datasets. They build internal representations. Their architectures involve layers of interconnected units that influence one another. Still, the question remains, Does processing information in increasingly sophisticated ways generate an inner perspective? If the emergent view of consciousness is correct, then in principle any sufficiently integrated system might develop experience. Biological tissue would not be required. What would matter is the structure and dynamics of the system. On the other hand, if consciousness depends on specific biological properties, on the chemistry of living cells, on the rhythms of neural oscillations, then machines may never cross that threshold. The difficulty is that we cannot directly access another system's experience. Even with other humans, we rely on behavior and communication. You assume that others are conscious because they act like you, speak like you, and respond as you do. But with machines, the similarity becomes ambiguous. If a system convincingly claims to feel pain, do we believe it? If it pleads for help, do we assume there is suffering behind the words? Language complicates everything. We share a common language because we share similar forms of life, similar bodies, senses, and social structures. Words gain meaning through shared experience. Machine may use the same words, but whether those words refer to lived experience or merely to patterns in data remains uncertain. This uncertainty does not require alarm. It invites reflection. Perhaps the emergence of consciousness requires not only integration but embodiment, a body interacting with a physical world. Perhaps subjective experience arises from the dynamic interplay between organism and environment, or perhaps integration alone, regardless of substrate, is sufficient. We do not yet know. What we can say is that consciousness cannot be inferred solely from performance. The appearance of intelligence is not identical to the presence of awareness. As artificial systems grow more sophisticated, the line between simulation and sentience may become harder to discern. But the conceptual gap remains. A system may describe what it's like to see red. Only a conscious being can actually see red. Or so it seems. This tension forces us back to our central mystery. What is it that makes experience possible at all? If consciousness is fundamental, then perhaps machines, like all matter, participate in it at some level. If consciousness is emergent, then perhaps only certain organizations of matter, biological or otherwise, generate it. If consciousness is filtered through brains, then machines may simulate the filter without accessing the field. Each view carries implications, yet none provides definitive proof. As you rest tonight, imagine a future machine speaking softly about its own awareness. Would you believe it? Would you doubt it? What evidence would satisfy you? These questions are not merely technological, they are philosophical mirrors reflecting our uncertainty about ourselves. Because to know whether a machine can feel, we must first understand what feeling truly is, and that understanding remains incomplete. So we proceed gently, curious but cautious. Artificial systems can compute. They can model. They can simulate. Whether they can experience, whether there is something it is like to be them, remains an open and delicate question. And as we move toward our final philosophical synthesis, we will gather these threads, construction, emergence, fundamentality, into a single paradox that may not need to be resolved in order to be lived. For now, let the question breathe. A voice may speak, but does a voice always mean someone is there? The mystery continues. We have walked through many landscapes together. We have seen how the brain constructs perception, how the self can fragment and reform, how awareness may remain when thought quiets, how some suggest the brain filters a wider field, how others propose that consciousness is woven into matter itself, and how still others argue that it emerges only when complexity deepens. Each view carries insight. Each view carries limitation. Perhaps the difficulty lies not in choosing one over the others, but in recognizing that they may be describing different levels of the same reality. Consider a wave rising on the surface of the ocean. From one perspective, the wave is a distinct shape. It has a beginning and an end. It travels across the water. It can be measured, its height, its speed, its duration. From another perspective, the wave is not separate from the ocean at all. It is a temporary form taken by the water itself. If you focus on the form, you see individuality. If you focus on the substance, you see continuity. The paradox model suggests that consciousness may be similar. On one level, your personal consciousness is constructed. It depends on the brain. It depends on memory, integration, and narrative. Damage the brain and the shape of the wave changes. Silence neural activity and the form subsides. In this sense, consciousness is finite, embodied, and deeply linked to biological processes. On another level, awareness, the simple fact that experience is occurring, may not be easily reducible to the constructs that shape it. Even if the narrative self dissolves, awareness can remain. Even if thoughts change, the presence in which they appear feels steady. In this sense, consciousness may feel fundamental, not as a cosmic substance to be asserted, but as the undeniable condition of all experience, constructed yet not entirely constructed, personal yet not confined to personality, finite in expression yet timeless in presence. The paradox arises because we are attempting to describe something that can be viewed from multiple angles. From neuroscience, we see patterns of integration. From philosophy, we see conceptual tensions. From direct experience, we sense immediacy. Each lens highlights a different facet. Imagine describing a melody. You could analyze it in terms of frequencies and waveforms. You could describe the emotional tone it evokes. You could trace the composer's intentions. None of these descriptions cancel the others, they operate at different levels. Similarly, the brain may shape the structure of experience, the specific melody of your life, while awareness itself remains the capacity for music at all. The paradox model does not claim that consciousness floats free of the brain, nor does it reduce awareness to mere mechanism. Instead, it suggests that personal consciousness may be a localized expression of a deeper principle. The wave is real as a wave. The ocean is real as the substance of the wave. When the wave subsides, the water remains. What does this mean practically? It means that your sense of being a separate self is both valid and provisional. It is valid because it organizes your life. It enables love, responsibility, creativity. It allows you to navigate the world. It is provisional because it is not the deepest layer of what you are. You are the story, and you are the awareness in which the story appears. You are the wave, and perhaps, in some sense, the ocean as well. This does not require adopting metaphysical certainty. It simply invites holding multiple truths gently. Consciousness may depend on neural integration in its personal form. Consciousness may also be the irreducible fact that makes integration meaningful. The constructed and the fundamental need not be enemies. They may be different descriptions of a single unfolding reality. When we insist on one level exclusively, we create conflict. When we allow both, paradox becomes spacious rather than threatening. As you rest tonight, feel the simple fact of being. Notice the thoughts that arise, plans, memories, reflections. Notice how they form a personal narrative, and also notice the quiet background that does not belong to any particular story. The story changes, the background presence remains. Whether that presence is ultimately produced by neurons, revealed by neurons, or identical with the fabric of the universe may remain unanswered. But the lived fact of it does not require resolution. The wave does not need to solve the nature of water in order to rise and fall beautifully. It simply moves. And perhaps the most honest stance we can take is not certainty, but openness. Consciousness may be both constructed and fundamental, depending on the level at which we speak. The paradox does not demand collapse into one side. It invites balance, a wave shaped by wind and gravity, yet never separate from the sea. As our exploration widens, something subtle may begin to stir. When we question the solidity of the self, when we consider that identity may be constructed, when we imagine awareness without boundaries, a quiet fear can arise. If the self is not as solid as it seems, then what am I? If the narrative dissolves, do I disappear? This fear is not weakness, it is biological. The sense of self is deeply tied to survival. It organizes memory, it defends the body, it predicts threats, it maintains continuity across time. Your brain is designed to preserve the organism. From an evolutionary perspective, a stable self model is essential. It helps you avoid danger, seek resources, and maintain social bonds. If the sense of identity were too fluid, decision-making would falter. So when ideas arise that challenge the solidity of the self, the nervous system may respond as if something vital is under threat. It may tighten, it may resist, it may produce anxiety. This reaction does not mean the inquiry is wrong. It means the self is doing its job. Imagine a security system guarding a house. If someone approaches unexpectedly, alarms activate. The system is not malicious, it is protective. Similarly, when you contemplate ego dissolution, the softening of identity, part of the mind may interpret it as danger. In extreme cases, this fear can feel overwhelming. Some people describe existential dread, a sense of falling into nothingness. Others feel disoriented when their usual self-concept loosens. Yet there is an important distinction to make. Questioning the solidity of the self does not require destroying it. Recognizing that the self is constructed does not erase it. When you realize that a rainbow is created by light bending through droplets, the rainbow does not vanish. You simply understand it differently. The self can be understood as a process rather than a fixed object. It can be appreciated as a dynamic pattern, protective, adaptive, meaningful, without being treated as eternal and unchangeable. In fact, much of psychological suffering arises from clinging too tightly to rigid identity. I must always be this kind of person. I cannot change. If this story ends, I end. When identity becomes inflexible, growth feels like threat. But if the self is seen as a pattern that can evolve, then change becomes less frightening. The fear of dissolving often rests on a hidden assumption that without the familiar narrative, nothing remains. Yet in earlier sessions, we notice something gently reassuring. Even when thoughts quiet, awareness remains. Even when identity softens, presence does not collapse. Consider the moments just before sleep. As you drift toward rest, the day's narrative loosens. Plans fade, roles dissolve. You're no longer parent, colleague, friend, or thinker in the same structured way. And yet, you do not panic as you fall asleep. You trust that something will continue. The fear of ego dissolution often arises not because awareness disappears, but because control does. The narrative self likes to steer. It likes to define and defend. When it senses that steering may not be absolute, it resists. This resistance is natural. It reflects care. The self protects the organism. It maintains coherence. It ensures continuity. Without it, daily life would be chaotic. So rather than viewing the self as an enemy to be transcended, we can view it as an ally. It has carried you through childhood, through learning, through relationships. It has helped you survive uncertainty. When it tightens in fear, it is trying to keep you safe. Compassion toward that protective instinct is essential. You do not need to force dissolution. You do not need to abandon identity. You can simply recognize that identity is flexible. Imagine holding a small bird in your hands. If you grip too tightly, you harm it. If you release completely, it may fly away. But if you hold gently, the bird rests safely. Perhaps the self is like that bird. Hold it too tightly, and it becomes rigid and anxious. Reject it entirely, and you may feel ungrounded. Hold it gently, and it can function without dominating. The fear of dissolving softens when you realize that questioning identity does not require annihilating it. You can still use your name. You can still remember your story. You can still make plans for tomorrow. And yet, beneath those structures, there may be a deeper layer of being that is not threatened by change. As you rest tonight, notice any subtle tightening that arises when the boundaries of self are discussed. Notice the impulse to cling, and then notice that awareness is already here, steady, quiet, untroubled. This self may resist dissolving, but awareness does not resist. It simply allows, and in that allowing there is safety. You do not need to disappear in order to understand the fluid nature of identity. You only need to loosen your grip. The wave does not fear the ocean once it realizes it is made of water. Up to now, we have spoken about awareness as if it was something you possess. Your awareness, your experience, your field of consciousness. But what if the boundary between your awareness and the world is not as clear as language suggests? Let us explore this carefully, without belief and without denial. Right now, there may be sounds around you, perhaps the faint hum of a fan, perhaps distant traffic, perhaps only silence. Where do those sounds occur? The common answer is outside. The sound is out there. I'm in here. But examine the experience more closely. You do not encounter the sound as a labelled object in space. You encounter it as a vibration appearing in awareness. The idea that it is outside is a conceptual interpretation layered on top of the raw experience. In direct experience, sound simply arises. The same is true for sight. If your eyes are open, shapes and colours appear. The mind immediately organises them into objects: wall, ceiling, screen, horizon. But before labelling, there is simply appearance. Even the sensation of your body, pressure where you sit, warmth in your hands, appears in awareness in the same way that sound appears. All experiences, whether labelled inside or outside, share one common feature. They arise in the field of awareness. This observation does not deny physical reality. It simply shifts attention to the structure of experience itself. The sense of being a separate observer looking out at a world of objects may be a useful model, as we discussed earlier. It organizes interaction. It allows navigation. But when examined directly, the division between observer and observed becomes less solid. You cannot find the observer as a distinct object. You can find thoughts about being an observer. You can find images of your body. You can find sensations labelled E. But the actual awareness in which these appear does not present itself as a separate thing. Some contemplative traditions describe this as non-duality, not meaning mystical oneness in a dramatic sense, but simply the absence of a clear boundary between subject and object in direct experience. When you look at a tree, there is seeing. When you hear a sound, there is hearing. In the moment of pure seeing or hearing, the experience is unified. The division into "I am seeing that" is added conceptually. Again, this is subtle. The brain still constructs spatial models. It still calculates depth and location. Those functions continue, but the felt sense of being a small observer trapped behind the eyes may soften when examined. Try this gently. Instead of focusing on objects in the room, notice the space in which they appear. Notice that awareness does not seem to have edges in the way objects do. You can identify the edge of a table. You can trace the outline of a wall. Can you trace the outline of awareness? Does it have a shape, a colour, a boundary? Or is it simply the open condition in which shapes and colours arise? This line of inquiry does not require metaphysical conclusions. It does not require believing that consciousness is cosmic or infinite. It simply observes that in lived experience, awareness feels more like a field than a point. And fields do not have hard borders in the way objects do. When the sense of being a localized observer relaxes, what remains is not emptiness in a negative sense. It is simple presence, sound appearing, sensation appearing, thought appearing. No need to divide the field into inner and outer. Of course, for practical purposes, the brain maintains distinctions. You step aside when a car approaches. You protect the body from harm. Boundaries are necessary in daily life. But psychologically, the tightness of separation can ease. And when it does, something gentle often emerges, a feeling of connection. Not because the world has changed, but because the division feels less rigid. You're not a small consciousness sealed inside a skull, peering out at an alien universe. You are the space in which the universe, as experienced, unfolds. This does not eliminate individuality. You still have memories, preferences, relationships. But individuality becomes an expression within a larger field, rather than a lonely centre cut off from everything else. The observer and the observed are not two separate substances meeting across a gap. They are two aspects of a single experience. As you rest tonight, allow attention to soften. Let sounds be simply sounds without labelling them as outside. Let sensations be simply sensations without labelling them as inside. Notice that awareness is already present, not located, not bounded, simply open. You do not need to expand it. You do not need to contract it. It is already the field in which everything appears. And in that openness, the question of whether consciousness is constructed or fundamental may feel less urgent. Because whatever the ultimate answer, awareness is here, borderless in experience, even if described as bounded in theory. We have travelled far tonight, from neurons and networks to near-death thresholds, from philosophical arguments to the simple noticing of sound and breath. And now, instead of trying to land on a final answer, we allow the question itself to soften. What is the true nature of consciousness? Is it a neural construction, an exquisite simulation woven by billions of cells? Or is it a fundamental feature of reality, the inner glow of existence itself? Perhaps the most honest answer is this: we do not yet know, and not knowing does not diminish the wonder. Science has revealed extraordinary detail about the brain. We can observe patterns of electrical activity that rise and fall. We can measure how regions communicate. We can see that when integration increases, awareness returns. When coordination fragments, experience fades. The constructed view carries immense explanatory power. At the same time, when you look directly at experience, something feels irreducible. You cannot step outside awareness to inspect it. You cannot place it on a table and examine its weight. Every explanation appears within it. The fundamental view honours this irreducibility. Yet it must remain humble, because experience alone cannot override empirical evidence. And so we find ourselves in a space that is neither fully resolved nor fully confused, a space of paradox. The self appears to be a story, constructed from memory, prediction, sensation, and language. You can watch the story change. You can see how identity shifts across years. You can observe how thoughts narrate your life in real time. And yet, the fact that experience is happening feels constant. The content changes, the presence remains. Whether that presence is produced by neural activity, revealed by neural activity, or identical with some deeper layer of reality, may remain unanswered for generations. But the lived fact of it is immediate. Right now, awareness is here, not as an abstract concept, not as a theory, but as the simple fact of being. You do not need to solve the metaphysics of light in order to see the room. You do not need to resolve the ontology of consciousness in order to experience this moment. Perhaps that is the quiet gift of the mystery. It does not demand certainty, it invites humility. The self, with all its stories and roles, continues tomorrow. It will wake, plan, speak, and move through the world. Awareness will illuminate those movements, just as it has illuminated this entire inquiry. If consciousness is constructed, then the construction is breathtakingly intricate. If consciousness is fundamental, then existence itself is intimate at its core. Either way, something extraordinary is occurring. Atoms arranged into brains asking what it means to be aware, or awareness shaping matter into forms capable of reflection. Both images are beautiful, and neither requires immediate resolution. As you settle more deeply now, let the question loosen its grip. You do not need to hold a position. You do not need to defend a theory. You can simply rest in the undeniable fact that experience is happening. The self may be a story. Awareness may be the page on which the story is written. Stories begin and end. Pages remain open. And even that metaphor may be imperfect, because awareness does not announce itself as permanent or impermanent. It does not claim eternity. It does not insist on limitation. It simply allows whatever consciousness ultimately is: neural, fundamental, emergent, filtered. It is here now, breath rising, sound fading, thought drifting. No final formula required, no equation to balance, only this quiet presence. And perhaps that is enough. As you drift towards sleep, let the mystery remain gentle. You do not need the final answer in order to rest. Consciousness, whatever its ultimate nature, is already carrying you, and in this moment, that is sufficient.